So, good evening, Ms. Sakuma. I'm the leader of Group 3 Analysts, and today my team members and I are going to be presenting on the topic of freedom of speech versus hate speech. Where should we draw the line? Next page, please. Okay, so I'll begin with a brief introduction, and then my team members will move on to discuss the following sections. Sahai will be covering the definition of freedom of speech, Mohammed will discuss the definition of hate speech, Anis will compare these two types of speech, Jim will discuss a case study in a Western country, Germany, Yvonne will discuss a case study in a Middle Eastern country, UAE, Chloe will discuss a case study in an Asian country, Singapore, Tamir will be discussing the risk of censorship, Mohammed will discuss the students' roles in helping to bring about the freedom of speech, and I'll end with a brief conclusion. Next page, please. Okay, so we live in a world where the ability to think as we wish and to speak as we think is considered a cornerstone of democracy. Yet we are constantly forced to confront a difficult question. Where does protected speech end and dangerous hate speech begin? According to authoritative organizations like Amnesty International, the right to freedom of speech is not absolute. Rather, it is a fundamental human right that comes with it specific responsibilities. True freedom of speech is not a license to incite violence against others based on who they are or because of our own prejudice. When freedom of speech shifts from challenging ideas and those in power to demonizing individuals and groups because of who they are, it becomes public discourse becomes threatened, and we can infringe on the rights and safety of others. Drawing the line isn't about silencing unwanted opinions. Rather, it is about creating a society where everyone's right to live with dignity and safety is protected equally. And so in today's presentation, my team members will discuss the histories, realities, and implications of this balance with relation to some of the philosophical concepts we've covered in class, to shed some light on how we can better manage this balance moving forward. And so I'll pass on to my next team member.
Hello, so this is going to be the first part of section 1, which is the definition of freedom of speech. So what is this thing called freedom of speech? Freedom of speech, the purpose behind of this concept, it was for Greek people to share their thoughts, ideas, and beliefs without risk of being censored or punished by the government. So to simply put in main points and stuff, it was just to share opinion and ideas between citizens, in between the government and stuff, so they can discuss public issues, criticize the government's laws or institutions and everything. It was also meant to participate in public debates between many of their employers in general. But for example, like in many of the histories that we know of, such as Socrates and stuff, they all started with something philosophical with their freedom of speech. So on the next page, I will explain a bit more about it. So where did it originate? It started all from the time where ancient Greece, where a lot of citizens were pretty much fried of a lot of freedom speech. So they started with something called parrhesia. Basically, it is something short called in freedom of speech. But later on, it started as just a concept, kind of evolved over time in Latin, which started being called before the freedom of speech. It was kind of more of a speech of liberty, so libertas into their own language. But later on, as time and modern days goes on with their generational industry rise and such, a lot of English philosophers, John Locke and John Stuart Mill, they started creating more philosophical, which updated most of the concept within the freedom of speech, so citizens can basically do presentation and speech in public speech in general. And so, in normal concept and simple layman's term, this modern day society, this freedom of speech is just the right of every human beings in many democratic type of countries. But of course, it's not unlimited. There are many things that happen which kind of devolve it to become a bit more, I guess you could say, negative, which is the other contrast side of freedom of speech, which Mohammed will talk about on the next page. So I will leave it to him.
All right, thank you so much. So, as we've just heard, freedom of speech is something that, of course, everyone has the right to. But sadly, in today's societies, we might find people using something which we call hate speech, which is in many cases not good, and therefore people still think that it is part of freedom of speech. However, such speeches or such hateful words and phrases should not be said in the first place. So here's what it means. So hate speech refers to any form of communication, whether spoken, written, visual, or online. In today's world, we have a lot of online media in which people can go, for example, on all of these social media platforms and spreading their negativity, as we say. So, okay, so hate speech, so whether spoken, written, visual, or online, so it attacks, threatens, or promotes hatred against an individual or group based on characteristics such as race or ethnicity, religion, nationality, gender, sexual orientation, disability, or other protected characteristics. So in general, today, in especially online for us, especially as Gen Z, we have we are always exposed to certain words, certain phrases that we are actually never supposed to say, but they are turned into memes. They are turned into media that is framed under entertainment. Unfortunately, it should never be under such category because while some of them might find it amusing, others definitely find it hurtful, and this causes a lot of tension between different countries, especially when there's a lot of racism these days. So racism originates from hate of speech, right? So it often involves offensive, abusive language intended to insult. So the whole goal of hate speech is to actually say things that the other listener isn't supposed to hear in the first place. So, of course, discrimination is involved and intolerance, okay, creating divisions within society. So, of course, it's not good, therefore, we should not do it. And it's different from freedom of speech because freedom of speech, you're supposed to say things. Yes, you're supposed to speak your mind, but not in a way that it hurts others. Therefore, you should always be respectful. So, what are the characteristics of hate speech? So, as for this first paragraph, it is exactly what we have just read, but it's highlighted here. But for the second one, so hate speech can be communicated through various platforms, including speeches, social media posts, videos, images, and memes. And today I can confidently say that memes, while all of them are funny, but a lot of the fun comes from it being racist towards others or saying things that we shouldn't really laugh on or laugh about in general, but sadly this happens. So it is a serious issue because it damages social harmony, negatively affects the mental and emotional well-being of victims, and can contribute to discrimination and hate crimes. So yes, there are many cases in which people have been, for example, fed up with what they have heard about themselves online or about their own people, country. Therefore, they go ahead and commit things that they shouldn't commit. As a result, many countries have laws or regulations that aim to prevent hate speech while balancing the fundamental right to freedom of expression. So here are both of them. Our next friend shall explain both of them in compare and contrast them.
Okay, so now we move on to the topic of freedom of speech versus hate speech, where we try to compare the two. So, to just start off, freedom of expression is a fundamental human right protected in Article 19 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights by the United Nations in 1949. Hate speech, however, forces a conflict between the two and the right to others' dignity and respect. So the question then becomes, when does expression stop being an opinion and become harmful discrimination? And that brings us to the harm principle, where famous free speech advocate John Stuart Mill argued that unrestricted expression is crucial for intellectual courage and truth seeking, but argues that speech also must be limited to prevent further harm. Next, please. So now we come to how we can combat hate speech. So there are particularly 4 proposed strategies by Gagliardone, and it includes monitoring speech, involving civil society, encourage platforms to be responsible of their content, and improving media literacy. But with this topic brought up, should bans also be necessary if these strategies can work? So this is where we might have to rethink bans altogether, because while they might be effective, it may not always be the best solution, and it has its own limitations. Lepautre argued that it's more effective to engage in counter speech against hate speech, to challenge hateful views, educate audiences, and prevent hateful speakers, from potentially portraying themselves as victims of censorship through bans. And with that concluded, I pass on to the Western country case study.
All right, I will be presenting my part, which is Western case studies located in Germany. Germany has the clearest examples of how a democratic country balances between freedom of speech and also hate speech. This makes it very suitable for the Western case study. So for the first case study, it will be Bogdorf decision in 1985. To summarize this story, it was a nuclear weapon project by the government. During that time, thousands of people wanted to protest the construction due to lack of safety, and also possibly could harm towards the environment and also any individual's rights. The government tried to stop the protests because it expected possible violence, especially when it comes to thousands of numbers. However, the protests took the case to a court and won with a big margin. Germany's highest court ruled that peaceful protests were protected under freedom of speech and also freedom of assembly. And as the final approach of the government couldn't stop the peaceful protest without any strong evidence or a clear statement, and it protects citizen rights to express their clear opinions and peacefully. Next slide. So moving on to the next slide, will represents the hate speech. It will be Udo Pastor's 2010. Germany, a country that strongly protects freedom of speech, but because of its history back in the days, which is the Holocaust events, it also has some of the strictness hate speech laws in the world. In 2010, a politician named Udo Pastors was publicly denied the Holocaust incident and made a wrong turn statement about anti-Semitic. At first, he claimed it was a freedom of speech purposes, yet it wasn't. This case took 9 years to settle down, and the European Court of Human Rights ruled that Germany did not violate any of his violate his freedom of speech by convicting him. And this happens in 2019, which is a long period of time. All in all, this case remarks that freedom of speech ends where hate speech begins. Next slide. As the benefit approach from these two cases, we can learn that Germany allows people to express clear opinions, protest peacefully, which strengthens the democracy and their country, keeps the government accountable for their people rights. At the same time, freedom of speech does have limits. Any speech that promotes hatred, discrimination, or violence will not be protected because it can harm any individuals or society. And to conclude, in Germany or any Western countries, shows that freedom of speech really does important democratic right, but it is definitely not definitely not absolute. From these two cases, clearly that demonstrate the balance between freedom of speech and hate speech. Thank you. Moving on.
Okay, so for my Middle East case studies, I choose the United Arab Emirates or UAE. The UAE is home to people from many different countries, religions, and cultures. Freedom of speech means people can share their opinions and ideas, but if people use speech to spread hate or discriminations, it can cause many problems and arguments. Because of this, the UAE has laws to stop hate speech and encourage people to respect each other. So the main question is, how can a country protect freedom speech while stopping hate speech and discrimination? This is a challenge for many countries. Next. So to solve this problem, the UAE has strict laws against hate speech. These laws stop people from spreading hate, discrimination, and violence. They also apply to social media. These laws helps people respect each other, keep the country peaceful, and reduce harmful content. However, there are also some challenge. Some people think these laws may limit freedom of speech. Sometimes it is also hard to tell the difference between giving an opinion and hate speech. Overall, the UAE tries to balance freedom of speech with keeping society safe and peaceful. Now, I would like to present a case study of Singapore. As we know, Singapore is a multicultural country where people from different races and religions live together. Because of this diversity, the government believes that maintaining social harmony is essential. Although freedom of speech is recognized as an important right, Singapore also believes that this freedom comes with responsibility. So, in other words, speech that encourages hatred, discrimination, or hostility can be restricted to protect public order and social harmony. So, to support this approach, Singapore introduced a law which is called the Protection from Online Falsehoods and Manipulation Act, POFMA, in 2019. So this law basically allows the government to respond to harmful online falsehoods that may affect the public interest. Another important law is that the Maintenance of Religious Harmony Act, which aims to prevent speech or actions that could create conflict between different religious communities. Next page, please. However, Singapore's approach has both strength and criticisms. On one hand, these laws help reduce hate speech and also promote peaceful coexistence in a diverse society. They also encourage people to communicate more responsibly, especially on the social media where the information can spread very quickly. But on the other hand, some human rights organizations argue that these laws may limit freedom of expression and also discourage open public debate. And some people worry that the government powers could also restrict legitimate criticism and different opinions. So overall, Singapore's case reminds us that balancing the freedom of speech and the hateful speech is not easy, but every society has to find its own balance between the protecting people's right to express themselves and protecting others from harm. Achieving this balance is essential for preserving both individual rights and social harmony. This is all for my presentation. Thank you.
Well, moving on to section 7, let's discuss about actual risk
of censorship. If we look at slide 16, the core of philosophical foundation comes from John Stuart Mill and what he called the infallibility trap. Mill breaks this down into two main concepts. First, on the left, we have the fallibility argument. When the state silence any perspective, it automatically assumes its own absolute infallibility. If suppressed opinion is correct, society is completely robbed of the truth. But even if the option is wrong, look at the right block. Dead dogmas versus living truth. Without open challenge, even the most even the most accepted truth degenerate into passive dead dogmas. Instead of genuine critical comprehension, citizens just hold beliefs out of blind custom. A robust intellectual defense only happens when ideas are constantly tested in open discourse. On the slide 17, we look at the danger of state monopolies, which expands on how this control plays out in reality through three major risks. First, there is epistemic paternalism. This happens when a government treats its citizens like a children, choosing what they are mature enough. This fundamentally diminishes individual agency and civic maturity. Second, we see the weaponization of safety. Laws that are initially introduced for good reasons, like protecting national unity or social stability, are historically redirected by states to insulate themselves from legitimate political dissent. And third, insufficient and efficient arbitration. Centralized autocrats are simply not equipped to act as objective arbiters of absolute truth. This always leads to biased curation based on political preservation rather than factual accuracy. And finally, on slide 18, illustrate the psychological and social outcome, the chilling effect and stifled dialogue. As you can see by magic on the left, this leads 0% genuine public consonance. This is due to invisible cost of fear. When state boundaries on speech are deliberate vague, citizens don't risk it. They engage in preemptive self-censorship out of pure self-preservation, and critical discourse on complex social issues just disappears. Ultimately, censorship acts as a temporary pressure cooker rather than a safety valve. By suppressing problematic ideas instead of confronting them, underlying social division are simply forced underground where they fester rather than be organically resolved through counterspeech. Let's move into the next session.
All right. So, in this part, we want to learn how we can support freedom of speech and avoid hate speech. So, starting with us as students, we can contribute to freedom of speech by expressing our opinions respectfully. And I believe this is the main goal, is that even if there's something that we do not like, something that we dislike on the internet, or someone said something, an opinion, we should counter it by being respectful. We should not let our emotions, turn our words into words that turn our speech into hate speech. We should encourage open discussions in classrooms, on campus, online, where everyone feels comfortable sharing their ideas without fear or discrimination or harassment. So, by listening actively and communicating politely, we help create an environment that values diversity of thought and mutual understanding. Students should develop critical thinking. We should always, I've learned this so many times, in which we should not also accept everything we read, everything we hear, or everything we see. We should also critically analyze everything, right? So students should develop critical thinking skills by evaluating different perspectives before forming opinions. And being open to constructive criticism and considering evidence helps create meaningful discussions and promotes a culture of respect and understanding. So we are also, if someone criticizes us, if someone says things that we do not like, we should either take that as feedback to help us grow, or we try and not let our emotions come out. That should be mostly it, really.
Okay, and so to conclude, the case studies of the countries we've discussed and the other viewpoints and the philosophical viewpoints we've covered are really meant to illustrate the fact that balancing between these two closely related opposites, freedom of speech and also hate speech, requires judgment, care, and awareness from both lawmakers and citizens alike. This was no doubt a difficult and contentious issue, since freedom of speech for one man can easily become slander or rebuke for another person. But when each of us seeks to understand this intricate balance better, with less concern for our own interests and more attention paid to others' rights as well, we can help maintain our societies and help make it a better place. Thank you all. That's the end of our presentation. And this is our list of references. Thank you.